All right, let's talk about polypainting basics. In order to demonstrate this, let's go ahead and go to our simple brush, into the tool palette. We'll take the plane 3D, drag it out on our canvas, go into edit mode, and because this is a primitive, I'm going to go ahead and hit make polymesh 3D, and now it's a polymesh 3D, PM3D plane, and now I can start manipulating this. So normally with the standard brush, we have Z add turned on with a Z intensity at 25, and we can start sculpting on our object here. Now we've already talked about resolution, so if we want to have higher resolution geometry, we can go in here and we can hit divide. That'll up-res this, and of course it averages our vertices, so you can see the corners are kind of averaging, and then this is kind of getting soft. So now when I do another stroke, it's a little bit higher res. I can hit divide. This stroke will be even higher res. I can hit divide, and now our point count is up here at 66,000, and now this one will be very high res. So a little bit of brush basics, and the reason I bring this up, and I'm undoing back to where we just had our regular plane here, is because RGB works in the same way. So we skipped, we talked about Z add and Z sub already. We skipped mRGB, RGB, and M. If you hover over these, you're going to see this is mRGB channel. If you hit Control, it'll give you even more information. Essentially, this allows you to paint materials. All these materials here, you can paint with materials, and you can also paint with RGB values, which RGB values are essentially what you see here, just color spectrum. And you can just paint with materials. And while you're doing all this, you can do it while you sculpt, or you can just paint. So for instance, if I have Z add turned on, I can sculpt. If I have RGB turned on, I can sculpt and I can paint. Now let's talk a little bit about that. So I'm going to undo both of those here. I'm going to turn RGB back off, and we're going to talk about Colorize. So Colorize is this little brush over here, and if you want more polypaint options, and we'll get heavier into these polypaint options later on in the series, but you can see we have a Colorize. There's also Polypaint for texture, Polypaint for polygroups. But for now, this Colorize button, when I toggle that on, it's going to turn on that paintbrush. So that's what that does, is turn Colorize on and off. So with Colorize off, if I go over here and I select a color, like green or blue or whatever, it's going to turn the entire object that color. In fact, if I don't have any materials assigned, I can go through here and I can choose any material, and it'll go ahead and update this object with that material. Now, as soon as I turn this Colorize on, the object's going to turn white. I still have blue selected, and I can go over here and I can choose the colors, but it's going to stay white. And that's because by default, objects in ZBrush, if they're imported without vertex color, or if you start with a primitive, it's going to have all the vertex colors are assigned a white value. So I can go over here and I can sculpt on this white plane with Colorize on, and it's not going to do anything. However, when I turn RGB on and I have that blue color selected, now when I sculpt, it's going to sculpt and color with that blue color. So if I go to the side here, you can see it's sculpting as well as assigning an RGB value. Now it looks pretty low res, it looks a little bit gross. That's based on the resolution of the object. So this isn't painting on a texture, like if you're in a texture painting program and you draw on your object and you're actually drawing on like a texture with the UVs assigned. That's not what's happening here. In ZBrush, what you're doing is you're actually assigning a color value to every vertice on this object. So you can see if I go across this line, it's going to paint those blue. If I go down this line, it's going to paint those blue. If I go across, it's going to get kind of aliased because it's having to paint on those vertices. So vertices are what holds the color on these components. So you're not really painting on faces, you're painting on vertices. Now if you paint 4 vertices, you're going to paint a whole face. But really it's the vertex that you're applying those RGB values to. Now if we turn polyframe off, and let's go ahead and undo back to where we just had our plane here. Let's turn Colorize back on. Let's turn Z add off for now, and we're just going to use RGB. So we're using the standard brush with RGB selected, and you can go through here and you can paint. If you tap S, you can make your brush size bigger or smaller, and you can do soft to heavy. So you can go soft to heavy, and just using your tablet pressure. You can also lower the RGB value, so you can drop that RGB intensity down. We'll get a little bit into that later, so we're going to keep that up at 100 for now. And now if we go back, hit down here to our geometry here, we can start painting, and then we can hit divide, and then we can start painting again. We can hit divide, we can start painting again, and you're going to see every single time, and I'm going to make my brush a little smaller, every time we divide, we're getting more and more resolution, like so. And these still look pretty low res, but if I put a stroke right next to this at this subdivision level, you're going to see how much higher resolution that is. And that's because if I go into polyframe now and look at our active points, we're now painting on 260,000 active points. A lot more vertices are catching that information than when you're in subdivision level 1 at 1,000 points. So if I turn polyframe off, you're going to see, just like when we're sculpting, it's going to look low res, but then when we go back up through our subdivision history, we don't lose any detail. We can just drop down, we can paint at this, we can sculpt on the subdivision level, and we can raise it back up. and begin painting again. Of course, you can choose any different color, so you can paint blue, you can paint green. If you hold down Alt, that'll do your alternate color. And if you hold down Shift, you're going to see, Shift is a modifier brush. So when I hold down Shift here, you're going to see Z add pops back on. If you just want to smooth out your colors, hold down Shift, turn off Z add, and now you're just going to smooth RGB values. So this is a really good way to just go through and kind of blur colors together or just blur out details like so. So let's go ahead and take our undo slider and we'll undo back to where we just had our primitive polyplane here. Actually, let's go ahead and divide this up. So we'll hit divide a couple times. I just want to get some resolution on here so we have some quality on here. And you'll notice that with these stroke options here, we do have lazy mouse on. If we go to stroke and then crank that lazy radius up, you can see we can paint with very smooth strokes here. If we hit X, we can go across X symmetry. So if you wanted to, and we'll talk about quick sketch later on too, but you can go ahead and you can, that's another thing too. If you hold down, should probably talk about this, with stroke turned on, or stroke lazy mouse turned on, when you hold down Shift, it's going to put a line, and then if you let go of Shift, it'll snap to that end. If it doesn't go all the way to the end where you stopped, that's a function of this lazy radius. Turn that lazy radius back down, and now when you hold down Shift, it'll snap all the way to the end. So you can go through here, and then you can hold down Shift and snap, hold down Shift and snap, and you can snap to different degrees, and you can just snap in between those. We'll talk more about these stroke options later as far as roll, backtrack, all of that stuff. But that Shift functionality, this happens, that rubber band comes out when you have lazy mouse turned on. If we undo all that, and then we go to stroke and we turn lazy mouse off, or we tap L on our keyboard, now when you hold down Shift, it'll actually constrain it to an up and down straight, or side to side straight, or a 45-degree angle straight. So start drawing and then hold down Shift, and now you're constraining it to an angle. So with lazy mouse off, you can just hold down Shift and go in a straight line. Let's go ahead and undo that. Here's another trick. If you hit W and then hit the Y key, you'll get the transpose line. So if, let's say you wanted to put a line from here, and let's go ahead and go out of X symmetry, so tap X. And then we have our transpose line, so if you just touch your object and you go down, say from this line here, and you want to put a straight line right across here, go ahead and put your transpose line here, hover over this white circle right here, hold down Control, and then tap that white circle, and that's going to rotate your camera, so now this is straight across. Go ahead and hit Q to go into draw mode. So hitting W goes into gizmo mode, Q goes back into draw mode, and now you can go here to here, just holding down Shift, and make a straight line exactly where that transpose line was. And then you can hold down Shift and rotate your object back. So anyway, with X symmetry turned on, you can make a straight line down the middle, and then if you wanted to like make a head or something, you can just start drawing within ZBrush. Now, like I said before, we'll get into quick sketch as well. Which will have a lot of the same functionality, but we're just painting on a plane right now. Let's go ahead and drag that undo slider back. Just go back to our blank canvas. Actually, you know what else we can do? Go up here to color, and you're going to see we have a fill object. If your RGB intensity is at 100, and you go to color, fill object, and you have the white color selected, and you fill, it'll go ahead and just clear your canvas. Now, if we undo that and drop our RGB intensity down to like 26, and we go color, fill, it's only going to do a 26% fill. So you can kind of knock this back, and then you can go back in here and you can kind of refine the sketch if that's what you want to do. Or if you want to clear this thing, you can just crank that RGB intensity up to 100, color, fill object. Oops, make sure you have white selected. And there you go.